Hey guys, welcome back to the Barry and Jeff Show. As we continue with this engine rebuild series for this 1985 Ford F-150, this segment of the video is about putting the bearings back into the piston connecting rods and the connecting rod caps. We're putting new piston rings in and putting the pistons back into the block. There is a big mistake that I made, and I didn't realize it until I was putting it all back together, and it's a big mistake that I learned from, and hopefully you will learn from as well. If you're doing your own engine rebuild, it's a step you don't want to miss. It's closer to the end of the video, but please stay to the end, learn the mistake that I made so you don't make it yourself. And also, if you are learning something and you're enjoying these videos, we'd appreciate a like and a subscribe. So let's go ahead and get into it.
And I'm going to use the original pistons because the pistons are in good shape. There's no cracked skirts or anything. We just need to put in the new bearings on the connecting rods. So I've got all my bearings from Engine Tech, enginetech.com. They are not sponsoring this video. I just wanted to let you know where I got them from. So I'll go ahead and open up the package here. This connecting rod has an oil port here, an oil hole. So one of the bearings has to have a hole for the oil. And so in this package, you have to dig through the package here to get down to a full set. So you've got these first 6 that do not have a hole in them, and then you've got these that have a hole in them. And so that hole would need to line up with the hole on the connecting rod side. So the first thing I need to do is just get the old bearing off here. So we're just going to take a small screwdriver and pop that out, and then we want to wipe that out really well. And for all of these, we want to make sure that we check to make sure that there's no damage underneath the bearing on the actual connecting rod, and that the oil holes are free and clear, that we can actually get oil passing through there. So I'm just going to take and spray a little WD-40 in there, make sure that that is cleared out, and that one actually looks pretty good. Now, it's important that you don't put in any lubricant on the connecting rod underneath the bearing. That just needs to be clean, and you don't want to have any grease under there because you don't want your bearing spinning. You're going to put the grease on the inside of the bearing itself. So for this one, make sure you can see that. We're going to take and match this bearing up with this connecting rod, and so we want to make sure that the holes line up here. So we're just going to slip this in and press that down. And you want to make sure that you press it down so all the gaps are removed from below the bearing and where it touches the connecting rod. And then you just want to push on that to make sure that the sides line up. To tap that down a little bit and make sure that the bearings get lined up flush with each side here. All right, that looks good right there. We want to do the same thing for the connecting rod cap. So I want to take this old bearing out and just get under there and pry that out, set that aside. So on the connecting rod cap, it looks like there's a space for a oil hole, but that's not an oil hole. That's just where they had, I think, an old bearing. I guess both these bearings had the oil holes in the bearings. They don't need to have a hole on the connecting rod cap side. So it looks like it's a hole, but it's not. It's just a mark left over from where that old bearing was that had the hole in it. All right, same as we did before, we're just going to go ahead and try to line that up on this outside. And then we're going to push that in, and that will snap in place. Again, we look to make sure that there's no gaps between the bearing and the connecting rod cap. And again, we're going to take my plastic handle, just tap that in a little bit to make sure that both sides are flush with the mounting surface there. That looks good right there. All right, we've got all of the bearings put in, the pistons and the connecting rods and the caps. Don't they all look pretty? Now we're just going to put the new piston rings on and get ready to put those into the block. So for the piston rings, again, I'm using Engine Tech piston rings, and you'll see they come in a set of 3 different compartments in here. It starts with your oil expander and oil rings. Then you've got your middle compression ring, and then your top compression ring. One thing to note about the middle compression ring is it's really important that these get put on the right way. So I'm not sure if you can see it on here, but there's on the piston ring here, you can see it says top on the top of the piston ring. That means that this is not the top ring. This means that this has to be facing up towards the top of the piston. It doesn't mean that it's the top ring. So we're going to start here by putting on the expander ring for the oil rings. And it says in the instructions that you're supposed to use this expander tool to put these rings on. I don't know that it really matters if you use an expander ring. What does matter is that you don't scratch the surface of the piston as you're putting these rings on. You get it started and then just spiral it around like this. You just want to make sure that nothing scratches the actual piston itself. So we've got that expander ring in. So now we're going to put our, and these don't matter if they're up or down. You're going to start that I'm just putting this one on the top of the expander ring, and then I'm bringing it around and I'm letting it in. And you just want to make sure that once it gets in there that you can rotate that freely. So that's the top oil ring. Now we're going to put the bottom one on. I'm going to tuck that in there, and I'm just going to walk that around. And I want to make sure that I don't scratch that piston with these rings. So just get it set in there. And then you're going to want to stagger your gaps, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute here. So that's the oil ring. They're in there good, and we just want to make sure that it rotates. It's not binding anywhere. So the next one is the middle ring. Again, we're looking for where it says top, and here it says top on that ring. So I want to make sure that that is facing up towards the top of the piston. Now for this one, to show you how this works, we will use the expander tool. And so you just put it in there like this, and then you can expand it so that you can slide that over and get it put in the groove. Okay, so that one's in there, it's moving freely. And then finally, the top compression ring, it doesn't matter which side is up or down. So again, we're going to use the expander tool. And the expander tool does make it easy, and you don't have to worry about it. If you've never done this before, the expander tool makes it easy so you don't scratch your pistons. So that's all 3 rings in the piston, and that's ready to go into the block as soon as I get all the rest of the piston rings on. So I'm going to do that now, and then we'll come back and show you how we actually insert the pistons into the engine block. We are ready to put the pistons in, and before we do, we need to make sure that the pistons, the rings are clocked properly. So this is a really important step that you don't want to skip. So
with each of the rings, you've got a gap in there. You don't want those gaps lined up with each other, because what's going to happen is you're either going to get blow-by through both those gaps into the crankcase, or you're going to have oil coming back up into the cylinder, and that's going to clog spark plugs, cause detonation, all kinds of things that you don't want to happen. So it's important that we clock the rings, and for the oil rings, we want to, for the scrapers, you got the expander ring and the scraper rings, and you want to make sure that those are clocked 180 degrees from each other. So I've got the bottom one here on this side here, and then I want to turn to make sure that the other gap for the top scraper ring is 180 degrees from the bottom one. And then for the middle ring, we want to have that one, the middle ring, 90 degrees offset on the exhaust side from the compression, or from the oil scraper. And then the top ring, we want to have that one offset 90 degrees to the other side on the intake part of the piston. And now we're ready to oil these things up and get them put into the cylinder. So before we get started, I'm just going to take some motor oil and I'm going to oil up these rings, and I'm going to put some oil on the skirts. So we want to make sure we've got good lubrication as this thing goes into the cylinder. Now normally when I'm dealing with a lot of lubricants, I'd want to wear gloves, but it's important that I can feel with my hand to make sure that everything is moving the way it needs to. We don't have anything bound up, the rings are free and moving well, and I can feel if there's any defects there. So that looks really good. All right, now I'm just going to wipe a bunch of oil in that cylinder, get it nice and coated. We're going to take our compression tool, and I want to put some oil on the inside of that as well. Now on these pistons, they all need to go towards the correct side of the engine. So on this piston, it's got a notch, and all those notches go towards the front of the engine. We're just going to go ahead and crank this down over the piston to compress those rings. Got our crankcase journal ready to receive that connecting rod. We want to make sure that our compression tool is adjusted so that the piston can slide down into the cylinder. Now we should be able to push this piston down into the cylinder wall, or into the cylinder. And I'm just going to guide it with my hand here to make sure that everything gets lined up, and I want to take my time here because I don't want to scratch anything as it's going down. I'm just going to gently tap this down and I'm just going to keep pushing that down until it seats on that crankcase journal properly. Again, take your time on here. You don't want to scratch anything up. Got the connecting rod seated on the crankshaft journal for the connecting rod. And now I'm just tightening up these bolts just a little bit, enough to get the connecting rod cap and the connecting rod to touch. And that looks good right there. Now I got to tell you about a lesson I learned the hard way, and hopefully you'll learn from this so you won't make the same mistake I did. Here's what happened. When I took my pistons out of my engine, I made the mistake of not numbering the caps for the connecting rods and the piston and the connecting rod themselves. I ended up getting the wrong caps on the connecting rods when I put it back in the engine. And I had one of my connecting rods so tight, and I only torqued it to 45 foot-pounds, which is the spec for this engine, but I could not turn the crankshaft because the bearing was bound up. So what I had to do is I ended up having to take all of these pistons back out of the engine and figure out which cap goes with which connecting rod. And it's not an easy task. Since I hadn't done it's been a long time since I've done this, I forgot to mark these. But what I had to do is I had to line up these caps and make sure that I couldn't feel any ridge where the connecting rod cap goes to the connecting rod, that all of the milling marks lined up. And it took me a while, but I finally got all of them matched up, and I will end up putting the bearings back in it and putting these back in the engine again. But that was a mistake that cost me about 3 hours of time to go back and fix that. So when you take the pistons out of your engine, make sure you number the piston and number the connecting rod to make sure that they're lined up before you take them apart. Really, really critical step, because these can't just go back together in any order. The connecting rod cap and the connecting rod have to stay together. Otherwise, what's going to happen is when you put the bearings in, you're going to have crush points that are going to crush them against the journal on the crankshaft. And if you have just a little bit of offset where these two pieces meet, that's going to bind up your crankshaft and it's not going to turn. And if it does turn, it's going to burn it up really fast. So that's a lesson I learned. Hopefully you won't have to learn from my mistake, because you will number both of your pieces as you take your pistons out.